committee. Just a couple of quick things before we go into the agenda. Can you turn your mics off if you're not speaking? Because we do get feedback, and I was aware just now that people couldn't hear me. So if you can't hear me, wave at me or put something in the chat. I think that my connection in rural East Mearn is fairly robust at the moment, even though it's chucking down with rain, but it does come and go a little bit. So if my sound quality goes, if someone can let me know, and I'll see if I can solve that problem. I live in a rural area where we have very poor broadband, and I've been trying for 4 years to do something about it, and I've failed so far. So hopefully in my next 4 years, I might be able to improve it for myself and my neighbours. Anyway, can we start off, Kevin, with the apologies for absence, please? Who have we had apologies from?
Thank you, Chairman. So we've had apologies from Councillor Broomfield, Councillor Briggs, Councillor Dunning and Councillor Bowerman. And Councillor Heron is also unable to join us on, for this meeting, but we'll pass any comments back to.
Thank you very much. Item 2 on the agenda is Chairman's announcements. I have several things to go through, and I will welcome if anyone wants to add anything at the end of this of things they think that I should have mentioned. First of all, on the countryside, Staunton Farm and Manor Farm attractions have both reopened last month as part of the phased reopening of services. We saw the opening of the fantastic new play barn at Manor Farm with a large indoor play facility and refreshment kiosk, along with additional outdoor play and extended animal paddocks. It's been hugely popular with visitors to the farm, and this is reflected in increased membership income, which is currently 30% above budget, which is very good news. Certainly from personal experience, I've been down to the Queen Elizabeth Country Park a few times, and that appears to be, again, very busy, both in terms of the car park visitor numbers, and particularly busy up around the top where the dog attraction is particularly busy, which I'm very glad to see. Secondly, moving on to libraries. The libraries have welcomed back 150,000 visitors to the end of May since they opened for limited browsing on 12th of April. That is quite difficult to draw comparisons with. It looks to be like a fifth of a comparable time frame in 2019. Obviously, we can't make a comparison to 2020. Between the 1st of January and the 31st of March this year, 370,000 physical items were loaned from libraries through the Ready Read service and COVID secure reservations. On average, since April 2019, i.e. over the last 2 years, 90,000 e-books and e-audiobooks have been loaned to Hampshire Libraries customers each month, double the monthly average of the previous year. And following on from the discussions we all had last year with the libraries programme, 7 of the transition libraries have reopened as independent community libraries, with 4 more planning to reopen this summer. Moving on to the registration service. The registration service have implemented the national marriage reform, where the system for registering marriages changed from May 2021, with the paper-based system being moved entirely online. There is no longer a requirement to complete a paper-based formal register for marriage, and the legal marriage certificate will not be issued at the time of marriage. Mothers of brides and grooms in England and Wales will now be added to marriage certificates for the first time, which is clearly very good news. Archives, finally, the Archives online events programme has attracted audience outside of the UK from people interested in the history of Hampshire, and will continue alongside the resumption of online events planned for July, which again is encouraging to hear. I don't know if anyone else in the committee wishes to add any local news to what has happened for the facilities that we look after. I can't see any hands going up, so I think that therefore just check. No one's got any comments. That concludes the chairman's announcements. Item 3, minutes of previous meetings. These have obviously been circulated. Do I need to do anything just rather than note them, Kevin, or do we note them? They're obviously attached to the agenda, pages 3 to 8.
On this occasion, Councillor McAtter, they're for noting and for general reference for this briefing of the committee. Okay, so in the interest of usefulness, let's just say they are noted. So I just ask all members to please unmute their microphones and say noted, to say they've noted the minutes of the previous meeting.
Noted.
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 Superb. Thank you very much. Item 4 on the agenda. Introduction to Select Committee Governance. To receive a presentation on the scrutiny process and surrounding governance. I'm guessing, Felicity, that's yourself going to be doing that, correct?
It's actually going to be me, Chairman.
I apologise, Kevin. I'm aligned you. Sorry, Kevin. It's over to you for telling us what we're meant to be doing on the select committee.
No, I mean Felicity would be welcome to do it, but
Felicity would do a very bad job.
Well, let's see how this goes. One second. I'm just going to share some slides. So hopefully these are going to come up for you shortly.
I don't think these are on Modern Gov yet. I assume you will put them on later.
That's correct. Yes. So the slides for this presentation and for Felicity's presentation will be added to Modern Gov and to the website afterwards for reference. So okay, Teams seems to change its presentation setup every time I use it. So hopefully everyone can see the first slide.
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Right then. So good morning, everyone. My name's Kevin Greenough. I'm a Democratic Services Officer, and this being the first meeting of the Culture and Community Select Committee of this new administration, I just wanted to take you through a few of the key points of the role of scrutiny in the County Council and essentially the role and purpose of this committee. So hopefully that moves us on. Yes. So in terms of background, formal scrutiny was introduced as a result of the Local Government Act 2000, which established executive arrangements, so the leader and cabinet model that most of you are familiar with, and that's the arrangements that are operated in most local authorities across the country. The requirement is to have, for an authority operating executive arrangements, to have at least one scrutiny committee to carry out those statutory duties. Hampshire County Council has chosen to have 5 that cover different thematic areas, sort of broadly linked to the main service departments. And those select committees are appointed on a proportionate basis, so they're cross-party and representative of the political balance within the council. But the membership of a select committee may not include a member of the executive, and that's because of the fundamental role of holding the executive to account. It broadly mirrors the parliamentary model of select committees. So just in general, the role and the purpose of scrutiny is to hold the executive and the council to account, to make recommendations to the executive or to the county council arising from the processes it goes through, to conduct and lead research and analysis into policy areas and possible solutions within the remit of the committee. And to assist the executive and the county council in the development of budget and policy framework. So looking at the Culture and Community Select Committee specifically, and its terms of reference, this is as set out in the Constitution. In terms of the executive member that is that this committee primarily relates to is the executive member for Recreation, Heritage and Rural Affairs, so that's Councillor Heron. And the department that this committee relates to primarily is Culture, Communities and Business Services. The specific areas within the remit of the committee are set out in the second 2 bullet points. Clearly, as is suggested by the name Culture and Communities, the remit focuses on culture as supported by the County Council, communities, rural Hampshire, and this looks at areas such as culture and recreation, heritage, community development, countryside and rights of way, developing sustainable communities, supporting diversity inclusion, community engagement and consultation, and lifelong learning for adults, as well as some regulatory services. So what does the committee do? What can the committee do? It holds the executive to account, and it can do this in a number of ways. It can scrutinise decisions which the executive is due to consider, that's known as pre-scrutiny, and I think historically that's been one of the primary functions of all of the select committees actually across the county council, is engagement with decisions before they're made. It also has the ability to scrutinise executive decisions that have been made before they're implemented, known as call-in, and that's as set out in the legislation. And there's a third role in terms of scrutinising the impact of executive decisions. So that can be like the long-term impact or the immediate impact of decisions that have been made. Looking a little bit more closely at pre-scrutiny, this is where a committee would potentially receive a decision report that was due to go to the executive member for consideration in the near future, or sometimes even for decision the same day. It depends on the timescales involved. And the select committee would be asked to review the decisions that were being proposed on the basis and the basis on which they were being proposed, and make any recommendations, either give their support or make any suggestions to the executive member before those decisions are made. And there's a number of issues that the select committee might like to consider, which can include whether the decisions are evidence-based, the level of consultation that's been undertaken, how the decisions are reflective of the county council's overall corporate priorities, and what alternatives have been considered. Call-in. So call-in is one of the is set out in the legislation that established select committees and as part of executive arrangements. It applies where a decision's been made but not yet implemented. And in terms of process, although I won't go into too much detail on that because it's possible to get quite bogged down. But in terms of process, a quorum of members would essentially need to call a meeting of the relevant select committee, which would then consider calling an executive decision in. The calling of the meeting would have to happen within 5 days of the decision being notified, and then the committee would need to meet within 14 days of that meeting being called. So this, and that's all as prescribed in the legislation. It's really, quite specific. If calling was being considered, then the committee would be able to decide whether or not to recommend that the decision should be reconsidered by the relevant executive member, or where the decision isn't in line with the budget or policy framework, that the county council could take the decision. And the effect of call-in is that any decision which is not in line with the policy or budget framework can't be implemented until the call-in has been disposed of, and urgent key decisions, which are decisions that a key decision, sorry, just to set the context properly, a key decision is one that would involve the county council spending or saving in excess of £1 million, or would have what's defined as a significant impact on more than one community. So the bar is fairly high for key decisions, and there's a notification process that surrounds them, which is, as set out in the legislation. In some cases, if that notification process wasn't possible because of the urgency of a key decision, then there's and the urgency process was invoked, then that would mean that particular decision couldn't be called in, but it could clearly still be considered and scrutinised by the committee, either as pre-scrutiny or subsequent. So looking at other functions of select committees, policy development and review is one of the ways that the select committee can really add value to the processes of the county council and to the key areas of development for policy and strategy, corporate approach to services. So each select committee is able to review and make recommendations to the executive or to county council on matters within their remit, to assist with the development of future policies and strategies. Sometimes things are referred to a select committee by the county council or by an executive member. Sometimes the select committee may decide for itself an area that needs or that they feel needs some review. The areas of review could consider issues such as whether there's a clear and up-to-date approach, whether the approach is right, whether the policies are coherent and joined up, and so there can be some occasionally, and it is only occasionally, there can be cross-committee work with other select committees, and whether the policies are effective when they're put into action. So, you know, is what we're doing working, essentially? A way that the select committee can occasionally work is through the establishment of working groups. So these tend to be thematic. They would be usually cross-party to reflect the membership of the overall select committee. Normally quite a small number of members, maybe 4 or 5 members, who would focus on a topic that the select committee feels there's a benefit to review, and the working group would effectively give additional capacity to do that. It's usually a task and finish approach that culminates in a summary of findings and maybe some recommendations to the select committee. And a recent example of this in this area has been working groups that have reviewed the library service. It's also worth adding that in terms of establishing a working group, that the committee to establish it would need to agree in terms of reference for it and some aims and objectives to make sure that it does have a sort of a set task and finish approach and can conclude appropriately. So agenda items for select committees, and you'll see that the final item on today is to look at the forward plan of business for the committee. But so how do items get on the agenda? Well, any member of the committee can request to put an item on the agenda of the next convenient meeting of the committee, to assist with this, the work programme is reviewed at every meeting, but suggestions are also can also be made to the chairman and to democratic services in between meetings. Any member of the county council can also refer a matter to the relevant select committee if they feel something locally or something that's across Hampshire that would benefit from a select committee taking a look at it and scrutinising it. And as I mentioned earlier, either the executive, so an individual executive member or cabinet collectively, or the county council could request that a select committee considers a matter that's been referred by them. That's occasionally happened where deputations have been made to a county council meeting and county council or a notice of motion indeed, and county council has asked the relevant select committee to take a further look into that particular issue. So what does successful scrutiny look like? So successful scrutiny is member-led and member-driven. It's got a work programme that's flexible, focused and achievable, with topics that are appropriately prioritised according to what the members want, or, what you as members want to achieve from it, and according to the priorities of the county council. It reviews any reviews it conducts are well scoped and project managed to ensure that they're timely and focused, and that the time and resources of the select committee are directed to where it can add most value, in order that everything is constructive and evidence-based. So, just to conclude, the role of scrutiny is much wider than the core legislative ability to hold the executive to account, which is, in some cases is sort of just seen as the call-in function. In actual fact, call-in historically in Hampshire has very rarely featured, because we've been so successful at pre-scrutiny and at member engagement in and select committee engagement in the decision-making process. And scrutiny provides an opportunity for constructive and cross-party member engagement and input through an effective dialogue with the executive and the department to contribute to policy setting and decision-making. And with that, I'll stop presenting, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Kevin. That was very informative. I've got a question from Councillor Cooper, but I'll ask a question of my own first, if I can. Can you just clarify for me if there's any difference between scrutinising a statutory function and scrutinising a non-statutory function?
Essentially none, actually. I think if providing it's a function that's within the select committee's remit, then I think the only difference would maybe be the objective at the end, in as much as a statutory function must still happen, whereas a non-statutory function is ultimately the county council's decision as to whether that service is provided or not. So in that context, the outcome, the options may be different. You can't decide not to do a statutory function or not to provide a statutory service, but the method and approach to scrutiny could be relatively or broadly similar.
The reason I asked was you made the comment on one of the slides about having to ask the question of whether it could be done differently, and clearly that applies in a different way to statutory functions to non-statutory functions, and that's what my question was really all about. Should we look more closely into options for non-statutory functions where clearly we have more flexibility than in statutory functions where maybe we don't?
I mean, I think that would be a political decision for the select committee and indeed for the direction of the whole county council. But clearly there are potentially more options on non-statutory services than on statutory. I think that there's probably not much more I can add on that, though.
That's very helpful. Councillor Cooper. Sorry, Felicity.
I think what I might add on that is I actually don't think there's much difference when it comes to scrutiny. There is a difference, obviously, in that statutory function, we don't have an option not to provide it. But statutory tends to be a very basic level. And so we have huge number of options as to how we provide a statutory function. And I think that we're splitting hairs if we worry about scrutinising them in different ways, because apart from we don't have to do it bit on the non-statutory, there's so much we can do differently around statutory as well. So I'd say just treat them all the same. Thank you.
Councillor Cooper.
Yeah, as I understand it from the end of last year, the coroner's service and the forensic science service were supposed to be incorporated into this select committee. What's the progress with that?
They are, yeah. So you'll see that in my presentation, but they are part of Councillor Heron's portfolio.
Thank you.
Excellent. That seems a good introduction to item 5 on the agenda, which is the introduction to the Select Committee, Culture, Communities and Business Services Department. So I guess you're going to go on through the wide remit of what the department actually does.
Yeah, so while Kevin hopefully manages to get my slides up, I'm afraid I caused him some stress this morning, I think. I'm very conscious I've got some members here who have been on this committee a long time and others who for whom it's very new. So I hope that what I've done with this presentation is give some interest for everybody. What I've done is I will cover what the entire department does, because what you have as in this select committee is only a part of the department, and I think it's probably just quite interesting for you to set it in the context of what CCBS does overall. But I will dwell on the areas that are this committee's priority. Also wanted to say, please interrupt me at any point. Okay, just put a yellow hand up and I'll stop and answer questions, because otherwise what I don't want to do is for this to become a bit of a monologue. It probably will be anyway. It's not an easy one to do online. I would much prefer to be sort of in direct contact with you. Now I've already got a hand up, so Councillor Crawford.
Yeah, thank you. As a new member of the
Yeah.
committee, in fact, new to Hampshire County Council after the election, I was wondering who scrutinises the other parts of the department that you mentioned.
Yep. Okay, so most of them are scrutinised. In fact, all the other parts are scrutinised by Policy and Resources Select Committee. We have a complex department in that I report to 4 executive members, one way or another, and the other 3 who are Stephen Foster takes all the property stuff, and then Councillor Reid takes some of the health and safety and emergency planning, and the leader handles the strategic land. I will comment on that as I go forward so that you can see on each service which councillor that's going to and then which select committee. But it is you, this select committee, or Policy and Resources Select Committee that we report to. Okay, so do interrupt me. That was a very helpful start. Right, Councillor Crawford, your hand's still up. I think, yeah, there we go. Right, Kevin, shall we move on? Okay, so what we've got here, which I hope is helpful, is a list of pretty much all the services in the department. I've probably forgotten one somewhere because there's a lot of them, but we've tried to identify all the main services, and the ones in sort of whatever they are, greeny blue, turquoise, are the ones that this committee scrutinises. The others, obviously, done by other members, and I will get to that as we go through. So what I will do as I go through is talk very briefly to each of these, but dwell on the ones that are in turquoise. Next slide, please, Kevin. So libraries. 40 libraries across Hampshire, a major part of CCBS, 11.7 or something million pounds worth of spend, and over £2.5 million worth of income across libraries. Emma Noyce, who's here, will be able to tell you which library that is. I'm afraid I can't at the moment. We had nearly 2 million digital visitors in 2021, a huge increase, quite obviously, over COVID in our digital offer, and we're very, very excited about that because we think it's another way that a wider audience can access into reading and books. It's not an either or. We need the library service in reality as well, but it is very, very good to see that digital readership increase in that way. We have about 1.3 million books for lending, so it's a very, very big service. And in 1920, which is the last time things were reported, we had nearly 5 million visitors across all our libraries. 5 million loans across all our libraries, and that was the highest of all the 159 authorities across the country who reported those figures to SIPFA. So we are a big library service, and we serve the whole of Hampshire. We obviously had some difficult times over the last year and a half where we have culminated in our savings programme closing 8 libraries, but we have a very strong base of 40. There are going to be no plans going into 2023 spending to do anything further in terms of closures of library services. So you can be confident that we will be going forward very positively. There are 3 elements to the library service in terms of the strands that they really focus on. One is reading. Another is digital, particularly enabling those who are digitally poor in terms of what provision they can get elsewhere to be able to come online in libraries. So there's that element of it as well as the digital readership. And then we are very, very keen over the next few years to really expand the creative communities element of libraries. I hope we will do considerably more work with the Arts Council and with the Hampshire Cultural Trust in terms of how we schedule creative work and activity across all our libraries and use them as bases for wider culture activities as well as reading. So I'm really, really keen that that is something that happens over the next few years. Okay, moving on, Kevin. And again, moving on. Some of these are just good pictures. And at the end, there is going to be some infographics for you around the main services that you have as a committee, just to give you a few facts and figures, most of which I hope I'll present in here. So property is not something that this committee scrutinises, but it's a very major part of CCBS. We have over 40 architects in the department, which just makes us by far the biggest in-house architect department in the country. They are all paid for through revenue. So nothing of that sits on core county council funding. They earn their keep. Mostly through the work we do around the capital programme in Hampshire, including the schools capital programme, which is over 20 million this year and ongoing at the moment. So really, really big enterprise here around property. And we also do all the maintenance of all these buildings, of all the school buildings and the county council's estate. So probably around 70–80 million pounds of turnover within property services across the board, and that gives us a real weight in terms of our position in the county, but also nationally, and our ability to just do good things, particularly around school architecture, where we are really market leaders in that area, and we've done some fantastic things with school buildings. Okay, moving on, Kevin. So just there's back one. So just on property, just wanted to highlight that top box. That is the new garden room at Hilliers that will be opening this summer, and that is the most beautiful facility, and I hope many of you will get down to see that in the course of the summer and beyond. Hilliers Gardens is not one you scrutinise, but it is very, very closely aligned within our countryside areas, and a lot of working across goes on now across the countryside, outdoors, and Hilliers, and they really form a cluster. But Hilliers is an independent charity, and I'll touch on that in a bit. Okay, moving on. Kevin, I might be able to take control, but I don't know if I dare. Right, Basingstoke Canal is one of yours, and in terms of the risk profile of the county council, is right up there in terms of the risks that the county council carries, because there are points along the canal which, if the wall failed, it runs high above large areas of housing. And so we do stand at risk of the potential for flooding, but we take a huge amount of care to try and make sure that doesn't happen. In the most recent sort of stormy weather, we have people out all night, and that's not unusual, making sure the sluices are working properly and taking care of any trees, etc., that might have be coming down. So it is a risk, but it is a risk that we manage and mitigate very, very hard. The canal is a legacy present to us from many years ago, and we have looked at whether we could divest of it, but it was the Canal and Waterways Trust, but it was just too expensive because they needed a huge amount of capital because of the structures that they work financially. So we have kept it. We operate it with Surrey because it goes right the way across the Surrey area as well as us. And we're actually in the process of beginning to review that partnership arrangement. I think that's something that this committee will want to look at in due course. Very interesting stuff goes on the canal. It's many parts of it are triple SI, sort of sites of scientific interest. The grey shot tunnels, thankfully in Surrey, have colonies of bats that we're not allowed to touch in any way. The grey shot tunnels are also shut and a bit collapsing, and so another liability sitting there. The path is extensively used by cyclists as well as walkers, and during COVID took a real bashing, and so we're looking at how we can go about making sure that stays safe and is repaired. We own a canal boat, we have a campsite, all sorts of interesting things go on the Basingstoke Canal, and it is a constant source of challenge for us in many ways. And Kevin, moving on. So another area, as Councillor Cooper brought up, asbestos has come into this committee. It's a small service, but an important one in the department. We reckon we've got about 40,000 asbestos installations. Lots more buildings that we probably have asbestos in because we just don't know until we go there, so we try not to touch it. The service provides all sorts of facilities in-house. It does a lot of training. It obviously does a lot of testing, and then it can manage and help manage removal where we need to. So very, very conscious that that is an important service in the department. It is also a service that needs to break even in my mind, because there is no reason why we shouldn't be charging the relevant rates for that service as we go about our work on asbestos. Coroners is also another one that is within, is a strange one. It's half within and half without your jurisdiction. So the coroners are independent members of the judiciary and are judges, and we have 3 coroners in Hampshire: a senior coroner and 2 area coroners. I had the honour of appointing them all about 6 months into my arrival as director. The county had previously not appointed any coroners for 30 years. So you can imagine that was quite an interesting process, journey of discovery in terms of how you appoint a coroner. So we appoint them, and they are on our payroll, but they are completely independent, and they report to the chief coroner. So they don't report to me. What reports to me is the support services that supply the coroners with all the admin. So they are part of our regulatory service from that point of view, and they have been working extremely hard and under a lot of duress during COVID. So this is one of those services where the staff continue to come into the office because we could not ask people to deal with what they have to deal with on the phone in their own homes. You cannot bring that into someone's house. So those staff continue to come into the office. It has been a traumatic period for them, as you can imagine, and because of the timelines that they've had to work to and the difficulties, we now have a lot of outstanding inquests, and we are appointing more staff in order to make sure that we can cover what we need to do in terms of inquests, etc., going forward. So the budget for coroners sits outside any of the executive member portfolios, barring the leaders. So it sits outside the department and is held corporately, but we run the service. So to some extent, we have choices as to which select committee scrutinises what, because the budget actually gets scrutinised by P&R. But in terms of the regulatory function and the staffing, I think it's completely relevant for you to be thinking about the scrutiny of that element of the service. So a very interesting and very delicate and difficult part of the department in terms of our processes, but we do it pretty well, I think, but there's probably always room for improvement in that sort of area. Okay, and I ought to say that we also, because we run the coroners, we provide all the mortuary contracts as well. The senior coroner was instrumental or was leading on setting up the temporary mortuaries during COVID, and we have a duty to make sure we have enough mortuary space. So perhaps something that we don't always realise the Hampshire County Council does, but that's one of our areas. Moving on, Kevin. We've also got transport management in the department. This is Councillor Forster's area, and they provide services to they provide all the lease cars to the county council. They provide all the pool cars. They also do all the service maintenance for the highways vehicles, which is an incredible task. And when we hear about the gritters being out 24/7 on a sort of snowy week, my staff are in the background also at the depots, making sure the gritters are maintained, filled up with salt again, sent back out on the road 24/7. So it's an amazing operation that when highways have to get going and mobilised in difficult weather conditions. We maintain the entire Skanska highways fleet under a service level agreement or a contract with them. We have huge fuel supply stocks, partly so that we can service emergency vehicles when we need them overall. Some really interesting work goes on down at Hampshire Transport Management, and although this committee doesn't scrutinise it, anyone who wants to visit one of the depots, meet a few gritters, and see what we do, then that's always open to you, and but welcome that. They're also leading the electric vehicle rollout across Hampshire, and all our vehicles going forward, all our smaller vehicles will be bought as electric vehicles. It's almost impossible at the moment to buy a big vehicle as electric because the technology just hasn't got there, but our fleet is moving fast now to being fully electric, and with appropriate infrastructure and charging points as well. So that's one of the good things, tick boxes on climate change. Moving on, Kevin. Again, not one of yours. This is another one of Councillor Forster's, but this is our school meals service. A huge number of staff in here, well over 1,300 staff across the Hampshire catering service. We provide school meals to 55,000 pupils a day. We serve almost all Hampshire primary schools and half of the secondary schools. We provide good food. I wouldn't like to see us in the bracket that some of the national publicity has led to recently. Terribly difficult time during COVID. We have weathered it, and I think we will emerge the other side at least as strong as we were when we went in. Huge amount of work done on healthy eating, and a lot of work done with schools to make sure that's promoted to pupils. So lots of campaigns and all sorts. But I won't touch too much on it here. But again, HC3 is a big part of the department and a huge staff base. Often quite difficult to get to because, as a department, because they're all out in schools. They work short hours. Many of them, just come in to do the food and out again, and they're low paid. So one of the real highlights for me of COVID for the department is that we were able to furlough these staff on full pay. No one lost their jobs, where other parts of the catering industry were really falling apart. So I think we did very good for many people in our communities as a result of those decisions that were made corporately. Moving on, Kevin. Harold Hillier Gardens, not one of yours, but very close to your scrutiny. It's run by Joe Heath, who's our Assistant Director for Rural Affairs Countryside. It's integrating as much as we can in terms of the way we think and the way we work with our outdoor service and with our countryside service, and you can see immediately what the synergies are. It is, however, an independent charity of which the leader is the sole trustee. Last year, so the year prior to COVID, was the first year of its life it's ever broken even, which is fantastic news. It has weathered COVID well. It will come out the other side, I think, very strong, particularly I anticipate this summer. Memberships are up, and I'm hoping that we're going to see some really fantastic stuff going on in the Hillier Gardens. And again, those of you who'd like to visit, more than welcome to host you and show you around. Just let me know if you'd like to go down and have a look. That's Hillier's. Sorry, Kevin, moving on. There we go. Records and Archives is one of yours. And few of you could have missed the record office, which is down by the station, unless you haven't looked up, because sometimes it looks just like a brick wall. But the records office, archives by the station, a landmark building in Winchester. We have a small records office and archives staff, but they're very highly skilled. We have part of our archives are designated as UNESCO quality. The pipe rolls, again, if you'd like to visit, the pipe rolls are amazing. Documents from the bishops of Winchester that would put many of our accountants to shame in terms of what they, how many bales of hay that year, what went rotten, what didn't. Just incredible micro detail of how the bishops managed their land. So really, really interesting stuff. The archives also manage all the Hampshire County Council records, and they manage our storage of that as well. So they have a wider base than just thinking about the archives of Hampshire, of the county. They're also doing an incredible amount of work corporately in terms of making sure our corporate records are safe and well managed. Moving on. Registration services. So I've touched on coroners, which are sort of part of registration, but also just outside it a little bit. This is a highly successful service. Because we charge, and we charge at rates that are set nationally, so they're not set by us, this is a service that actually brings in a huge amount of income. So they break even, but they do better than that. They make a contribution to the department in terms of their budgets as well. And that's obviously enables us to do other things across the department, so that's really useful. And they go from strength to strength. So there are 150 approved wedding venues in Hampshire. We have 11 venues where we can have a ceremony that is run in-house. And we have 117 staff who are on annualized contracts, who are the registration staff who then take weddings. During COVID, really interesting period. We've had some people now who've cancelled their wedding 4 times and had to rebook and rebook and rebook. We've been as good as we can about enabling those rebookings to happen. We are now, I'm sure, like all registration services, at full capacity for months to come. We haven't got slots for people to get married because of this sort of wave of backlogs. So we anticipate some challenging times ahead, but we're doing our absolute best to accommodate people and marry them as they want to be married and where they want to be married. We also run citizenship ceremonies. About 900 people a year go through our citizenship ceremonies, and they mean a huge amount to those people, and really seen that people suffering during COVID, where we've only been able to do virtual ceremonies, which is okay on a sort of factual basis, but people like the being there, like the fact the Lord Lieutenant is there, executive members are there, and feel that's part of their sort of coming into the British community, I think, and it's amazing how poignant they can be. So that's our registration service. We also register all deaths in Hampshire, and obviously that has been very, very hard for our services over the last year. Death registration is clearly up because of COVID. Some very distressing circumstances that our staff have had to manage. Again, these are these are staff who are not paid a lot, but they do a huge amount. And we get a lot more thanks than we get anything else from people who've had to deal with the death service and sort of negotiate their way through what can sometimes be difficult circumstances in terms of who they have to tell what to. So that, again, those staff were in the office the whole time because, again, we didn't want people feeling that that their phone was constantly going with this sort of work, with the Hampshire deaths coming into their kitchens and lounges. And we also register all births. So it's a busy service. It means that every Hampshire resident, somewhere along their passage of life, does touch base with us in terms of one of these registration statutory services. Moving on, Kevin. So scientific, also with you now, coming under Councillor Heron, and really interesting down at the lab. Again, another service that needs to break even, in my opinion. It's not a statutory service. There is no capacity going forward to core fund it, but they are more than capable because of the skills they have and the rarity of those skills to break even going forward, and we're very, very close to that at the moment. They are one of only 4 local authority-run scientific services in the country. They act as the principal scientific officer for a huge number of authorities, because every authority has a duty to have one, but they don't have to have them in their own authority. They have big contracts with the police for forensics, which means that they do pretty much all of the alcohol and drug sampling that from when police take sort of breathalyzers, etc., in any sort of incident that the police might have. So we have a huge number of very big machines that do all sorts of clever things. We have a level of budget for illegal drugs, because we need to have the sort of so in order to find out if someone's got cocaine in their bloodstream, we need to tell the machine what cocaine is. So we need some cocaine in order to tell the machine what it is. So that they're the only part of the department that we can legally provide one or two of these interesting substances, and obviously controlled and very carefully run. We also do an awful lot of fingerprinting work for the police. We destroy teddies for trading standards, which is all a bit macabre. If you go down there, you'll see lots of teddies being destroyed to see if they're up to standard in terms of CE markings, etc. We do an awful lot of food safety testing, both for HC3F and for trading standards. So a really interesting service, one that you don't hear much about. We can definitely make sure you A, visit if you wish to, but B, we'll make sure this is one of the services that you can scrutinise and learn more about in the course of the duration of this committee. So that's scientific. Moving on, Kevin. Outdoors, another big one of yours, and we have 4 outdoor centres, and 3 of them are in Hampshire. So those are Runways End, Tile Barn and Calshot. And then we have the Hampshire Mountain Centre, which has been renamed the Argyll Lwyd. I don't think that's the right pronunciation, but I've got some, you'll see it on some slides later, Mountain Centre, which is in Wales. And that is pretty much entirely funded now by the Portal Trust, who send a lot of inner city London children out to that centre, but it also supplies services to Hampshire schools, etc. Wonderful centre, and many life-changing moments there, and at Calshot, Runways End and Tile Barn. And I can't Councillor Heron and I were up at Runways End yesterday, actually visiting, and what was really interesting was the staff was saying that they have now got school pupils back in there, thank goodness, and they have noticed a real change and in the social skills of the children, particularly the younger age groups that are coming in, and the team working, and many more children who can't communicate very well in terms of conversations with their peers and with their teachers and with the centre staff. And evidently that is being sort of supported by what the teachers are saying. They are really seeing the impact of COVID. And I can't overemphasize how much I think that our outdoor centres can play such a role in reversing that problem over the next year. When we went into COVID shutdown on the outdoor centres, we made a very rapid decision. We were going to do full refunds to all schools because schools were so stressed because it's parents' money. That was different from the approach that was taken by many of the private sector companies, most notably PGL, got into trouble for it in the headlines. And that approach of just, here's your money back, but do book with us again, has paid off absolutely in dividends. And we are now seeing schools that we've never seen before who are coming forward to come to our centres. We've had a huge number of bookings, and we think we're going to be extremely busy going forward. And I'm absolutely delighted with where we're at. We subsidise currently the outdoor centres to the tune of about 400,000 a year. And again, my approach as director is that these are not statutory services. As we go forward, we need to get them to breaking even point, and we are working hard at that with the outdoor service. They are becoming much, much more commercial. They're understanding their cost base. That is not the degradation of services. What I want it to be is that we build it and build it and build it, so that we go in fighting and we come out strong. And I think that's exactly what I'm seeing now. We're investing in business staff, we're investing in visitor staff, and in systems. And I think that's going to really secure the future of these centres, and I'm very, very excited about it. The moment they can get to break even, then anything they can make beyond that, we can reinvest in the centres and they can grow from there. So that is the plan, and that is the roadmap for those centres. Runways End has just become officially carbon neutral, and we're going to take that forward and market it heavily as an eco base as well as an outdoor centre. Carbon neutral at the moment only because we're buying carbon credits, but we are on a trajectory to be fully carbon neutral there without having to buy credits, and some really interesting work going on. Everything from the wood chip boiler, which has been there a long time, through rainwater harvesting to make sure that everything, all the water on site, all the grey water is coming from the site, and some really, some other good stuff. So again, Runways End, a very, very interesting place. Tile Barn, we're running public camping now in the summer, under the sort of more relaxed arrangements that the New Forest have brought in, but we're also making maximum use of the pods there, which offer low-cost holidays for military personnel, and that is also very successful and popular. So the outdoor centres flourishing, and more to do. And again, visits to any of them from you would be very, very welcome. Calshot's the biggest and the busiest, and has the most public facilities as well. So that might be where we'd want to start. The leader went down to Calshot the other day, and really enjoyed his trip. We're working on bringing in a Schneider S5, for those of you who are into seaplanes, which is being rebuilt somewhere else by a charity, and we're hoping to host that at Calshot. And as you will probably know, the leader's quite interested in aeroplanes, so that was a sort of match made in heaven in terms of his visit and the interest there. So that's our outdoor service. So moving on there, I've got some other pictures of outdoor service because they're just so nice to have. So Kevin, we can just move through these fairly quickly. There we go. Paddleboarding at Calshot. That's Calshot's dry ski slope. And we're into Countryside. So Countryside, another one of yours. You've got some, you're by far the best select committee in terms of the things you've got under your belt. Countryside service. Huge acreage in Hampshire that is owned by Hampshire and managed by us. Over 80 sites across the county, of which 5 are national nature reserves and 31 are local nature reserves. And they across the entire county. Those of you who haven't been to Keyhaven Marshes, it's a magical place right down on the edge of Hampshire in the west. And then the heaths up at Yateley, etc., a very, very special heathland that goes right across into Surrey. And then we've got Titchfield Haven, which is pretty much an RSPB level reserve down on the coast at Titchfield, and a huge number of other things. 3,000 miles of rights of way in there as well, and I'll just touch on rights of way in a moment. So that's the chapel at Netley, for those of you who don't know, and the chief executive, as part of his leaving sort of trip, is going to go up that tower. Last time he tried to go up the tower, he got 3 steps up and faltered and came back down again and said never. He's decided to try and conquer it in his final time, and I've been told to take a picture of his face at the top. So that's happening in the next few weeks, and we'll see how he gets on. In fact, the picture of the couple sitting at the bottom there is Keyhaven Marshes. It's a very beautiful place with a lot of very interesting birds for those of you who are interested. Moving on, Kevin. So we have 3,000 miles of rights of way. Rangers who manage that, and they do everything from brush cutting through to repairs of bridges, etc. There is a very significant health and safety aspect to those rights of way. Landowners are responsible for rights of way that go across their property, but the moment somebody tells us there's a problem on a right of way, we have a sort of joint level of responsibility in terms of that knowledge. And last couple of weeks we had a part of a bridge parapet collapse on a buoy, causing injuries, and it really brings back that sort of brings home that feeling of responsibility for a huge number of things that we have no full control over in terms of our responsibilities around health and safety. Because you've got bridge parapets kids swing on them, all sorts of things happen. We can't. People trip up over tree roots. We can't manage everything in the countryside to the level of an urban street. And so, risk has to be there. But we do our best, and we have just put £500,000 worth of money into the rights of way service to try and repair some of the COVID damage, because the usage of those footpaths over the last year has caused some extreme erosion, and so we're working very hard with additional contractors, etc., to try and bring the footpaths up to a standard again. So that work is going on at the moment. On you go. Oh, and I should say, just in terms of our countryside and ranger service, a huge number of volunteers. Over 1,000 volunteers help us across the rights of way and countryside service, and that in itself is a very, very beneficial thing for those volunteers, and we think we do a huge amount of good work for the mental health of those people, but they do a huge amount of good work for us, and we couldn't be without them, and we have missed them dreadfully during COVID. And we have not just in the countryside service, but we have volunteers plenty at Hilliers who have been dearly missed as well, and right the way across the library service and elsewhere, and we rely hugely on those volunteers. We do quite a lot for them and with them in times that aren't COVID, and we are gradually bringing them back into the system now. It was very difficult during COVID because by the age profile of those volunteers meant that many of them were vulnerable, and so we just couldn't continue as normal, even though we were outside. So that has been tricky, but we're bringing it up to speed now. Rights of way, nature reserves, and the big country parks. So we have the 4 big country parks in the countryside service: Leap down on the south coast, sort of bottom of the New Forest, Royal Victoria, sort of bottom of Eastleigh Borough, and Queen Elizabeth over in the east, around the hangars, and Hamble in the middle. Hugely used. We've seen incredible visitor numbers during COVID. We made some strong decisions to ensure that in line with government guidelines, but absolutely the moment we could, we reopened the country parks, and that was so well received by people in terms of safe places to go during the sort of edges of lockdown, when these were the first things that could open. And we're now seeing them go from strength to strength. They make a significant amount of money for the countryside service through the automatic car parking, and we're now really increasing the offer within the country parks, both in terms of the catering, but also the other activities, because the longer people stay, the more they pay for car parking, but it's blooming good value for them in terms of what they get in the parks. Councillor Branson.
I just wondered why Staunton isn't in that list. Is it on the next slide, or?
No, it's because I added that list in a hurry this morning and I've forgotten it. There we go. Thank you. We will amend that before we send it out. Thank you, Councillor Branson. Sorry. All it said was country parks, and I just put them in and have completely missed poor Staunton. So there we go. And Staunton over in the Lee Park area, a fantastic park actually. That is. It was a legacy of an original country house, and I think serves that community extremely well. We have just done a huge amount of work on it through lottery funding, and there's going to be a grand opening. At the moment, it's scheduled for the 9th of July. It may just move to bring us out of COVID restrictions, hopefully, but a huge amount of work to those of you who know it, to the old clock house, new car parking, and a real opening up of the northern end of that park. So there we go. That's all the country parks. Moving on. And that's just the lookout at Leap. For those of you who haven't been down there, probably one of the best views in the country from which to have a bacon butty, right out over the Solent, over Hurst Spit, and over to the Isle of Wight, and poignantly where quite a lot of the D-Day stuff went from, and some beautiful views actually that we had when I last went down there for the D-Day memorial, which of course was 2 years ago now, but some really interesting history at Leap, and a super little country park on the edge of the New Forest gets overrun in summer if we're not careful. I would anticipate this year is going to be one of the years where we will struggle with visitor numbers at that particular country park. Moving on. And Staunton and Manor Farm, that's in Hamble and the Staunton Country Park. We have farm attractions. So again, good visitor base, and in fact, in the chairman's opening remarks, he mentioned the play barn at Manor Farm, which is a great new structure, indoor soft play, and makes that farm attraction very attractive, if you like, in all weathers. And again, it's all part of this plan to secure the future of this type of non-statutory service by making sure that they don't have to rely on the core county council funding. They can rely on their own income generation. At that point, they can fly. So that's where we're going with these attractions. Obviously, it gives us a significant health and safety challenge and responsibility here in terms of all sorts of animal-related health and safety, but we manage it well, and we have qualified staff in terms of farm people. So it's not just the odd countryside ranger who's managing these places. They are managed by people who know what they're doing, which I consider to be quite important. Right, moving on, Kevin. Trading standards, another one of yours under the regulatory function. We have just launched a significant consultation with the trading standards staff to completely revamp the trading standards service. And we will obviously bring any policy decisions that Councillor Heron is going to make on that back to you. And I anticipate the trading standards service will, the plan is that they move from a very traditional provision at the moment to something more forward thinking in terms of how we support businesses and how we support good quality work right the way across Hampshire. At the moment, there is a tendency towards enforcement, and I want to shift that more to the supportive end of things. However, enforcement is important where enforcement is necessary, and I have no qualms about taking people to court where we need to. There are over 31,000 premises in Hampshire that we have some level of responsibility for as trading standards, 9,000 food outlets, which are obviously fairly high risk, and over 4,000 livestock outlets, because we have a responsibility in trading standards for animal welfare as well as human welfare. And our animal welfare team, I think, does some fantastic work, particularly around farmers who may not have the right standards or the desired standards of animal welfare or even animal disposal. And it wasn't long ago that we were investigating carcasses that had been disposed of in a pit on farm, which obviously is not something we want to be seeing happen anywhere. So we really work on animal husbandry, and we're anticipating more challenges as we think feed prices are going to be going up because of Brexit, etc. So that team is on high alert around some of that. We have 500 people or 500 businesses in our Buy with Confidence tick boxes, which you'll have seen around in terms of who you can get your plumbing services or your electricity services from, in terms of the security of knowing that they've gone through a process with trading standards in terms of their quality control. We also do some really interesting stuff that we get paid for in our bonded warehouses in Hampshire. We've got about 10 of those where goods come in from abroad and are held before onward distribution. I've been down to one of those warehouses and watched trading standards staff home in on interesting goods, I think would be the way to put it, that probably as a result of their intervention don't get onto the British market. So it feels to me a little bit like sort of trying to find a needle in a haystack. but probably better it's done as a preventative measure rather than leave the doors completely open. So more to come on trading standards, and I'm sure we'll get our teeth into them, or you'll get your teeth into them as the select committee as we go forward. Moving on, Kevin. I'll just touch on broadband. That's Councillor Forster's bailiwick. Probably Councillor Heron quite glad about that. We have no responsibility for delivery, but as a local authority, we have put money into helping communities get superfast where it hasn't been economically viable for Openreach, who's the main contractor, to put it in. We are currently just about to take a paper through Cabinet that will see us continue with a voucher scheme in the next round of superfast broadband rollout. So if that goes through Cabinet, and I would anticipate it will be supported, then we will continue to be supporting communities to top up what's needed in terms of the gap between the what's economically viable for the contractor and what the community needs in order to get broadband into their community. It's a hugely difficult area. We get a huge postbag on it. And we work on it as diligently as we can. We've got to all but 2% of Hampshire premises now. The 2% is hard. It's isolated dwellings. It's expensive. It's in the New Forest, not entirely, but significantly. But ironically, there are also some urban areas, some streets that have been just missed by the infrastructure. So it is a complex picture as well. And, we've just had a interesting and long dialogue with Natural England, who are rightly protecting the New Forest, where they told us we couldn't dig a verge up or any verges up to put in boxes for broadband. And you're left thinking, well, how are we going to do this? We've resolved it, or Openreach have managed to resolve it, but it is a long and complex process, particularly in these more fragile environments. That's broadband, Councillor Forster's area. Hilliers, we've touched on already, so we'll move on from that one. Property services, we also have a very big strategic land holding, which we manage. This comes under Councillor Forster up to £1 million, and then the leader takes the strategic land, which is the really big projects. And this is related to our county farms, but we have 20 development sites in train at the moment, a really significant enterprise. It creates capital for the county council as we go forward. So the main ones we've got on the books at the moment are Botley, where we've got Uplands and Winchester Road, and we are in the process at the moment of bids are coming in to take slices of that from developers. We're working very hard with Basingstoke on the Manydown development, which is just about to have its Section 106 sorted out, which means that we will start the rollout of infrastructure up there. We've got other very big land holdings in Basingstoke that are coming into development opportunity at the moment. East Hampshire in terms of the Old Mill Chase School and any number of others. So an area of the county council's work that isn't often sort of aired, it reports to, say, the leader and Councillor Forster. It goes to BLAP a lot, which is the sort of select committee that supports Councillor Forster, but it's not a select committee. And it also reports to PNR. So that's all I'll say on that, but an interesting area for the department and a very significant part of our work. Moving on, Kevin. FM, so again, Councillor Forster's area, but we do run all the facilities management for all the county council buildings. Moving on, I'm conscious of time. The Great Hall, another one for Councillor Forster, and a hugely popular visitor attraction for Winchester, and another one that comes within the county with the department's bailiwick. Moving on, Kevin. And then another one that you will scrutinise as scrutiny, as the select committee, who can resist the big tractor picture? But county farms, 34 odd county farms, or not odd ones, very interesting county farms right across the county. Quite a cluster on the south coast, but then spread out in various other parts, varying from very small holdings to pretty significant ones. So from part-time farming through to the major industrial type market farming on the south coast. So we will bring more detail of county farms. Councillor Heron has just approved an entire new policy. We spent 2 years reviewing how we run county farms, what our tenancies should be, how we can the new policy brings in much more around the expectations we have of our tenants in terms of their businesses on sustainability and climate change, animal husbandry, and the way we will work with our farmers to sort of enhance that as we go forward. The new policy also looked very, very carefully at what type of tenants, the length of tenancy, how we, what the basic farms and then the progression farms will do. And again, I think it's something that you as select committee will want a significant briefing on at some point, and we'll want to be scrutinising what we're doing on this as we go forward, because it's again an unsung but very interesting part of what the county council does. Moving on, Kevin. And then pretty much finally, here's some pictures of gritters, because this is our traded units. So county supplies, Hampshire Transport Management run as full trading units, and county supplies has a very significant turnover. We look to make about a 1.5 to 2% profit margin, because that enables us to reinvest. We supply pretty much all the schools and public sector and others in Hampshire and well beyond, everything from loo roll and pens to much more interesting items and computers. We've run all the PPE, county supplies ran all the PPE warehousing during COVID and are still doing so, and they've got a very big base down at Bar End. So again, very interesting logistics. Councillor Forster gets this one, but just that you know what we're doing as a department. And moving on.
That's the last one, Felicity, of these.
Okay, I'm going to stop now. There are some infographics that we will send around to you that really cover off just what I've said around your services of the committee. Sorry if that was a bit long, but I hope that it has sort of given you a bit of insight into what the department does, but also what the committee will be doing.
Felicity, thank you very much. Before I ask others about questions, I've got 2 quick questions about the scope of what we scrutinise. One of which is on Hilliers and one of which is on the Great Hall. Can you just explain why those 2 county assets are not part of this committee, given our remit appears to an outside observer that those look to be both cultural and community assets owned by the county council? Well, why are those not scrutinised by this committee?
Okay, so the Hilliers is an independent charity. It's not scrutinised by anybody. It's just outside the county council's remit as a charity recognised by the Charity Commission. The leader is the sole trustee of that, and it runs separately to the county council. So that doesn't come under anybody.
Sorry to interrupt, but that means no one scrutinises that charity at all. So in other words, even though the leader is effectively running it, there's no scrutiny by the county council.
It has an advisory committee, which includes the curator of Kew Gardens. So it has an advisory committee that oversees it, but that's the way it is legally set up, and it is not part of the county council. The leader is the trustee, but it is not part of the county council. It is independent of that. And then the Great Hall is a bit of an anomaly. We might be able to do something about it. The reason it is currently with Councillor Forster is that it was budget-led, and its budget sits within facilities management, and facilities management sits within Councillor Forster's area. I'm conscious it looks a bit strange. And I don't think Councillor Forster will worry if you want to do some scrutiny of the Great Hall. It's a little bit of a sort of where do we put it type of one, and we ran it according to budgets rather than anything else.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for Felicity following that wide-ranging presentation about what our scope of scrutiny is? I can't see any hands going up. Oh, Councillor Jackie, Councillor Branson. You're muted.
Thank you, Felicity. I think that was a very interesting presentation. It was really just a question, really, of how you were managing things like the registration and marriages, you know, in places like Havant Borough Council's building. Did you use those at all for weddings and registration because they were closed? It was just really out of interest.
I'm not sure about that one. Emma, are you? Sorry, I didn't introduce Emma in the first place. Emma is our Assistant Director for Culture and Communities. So, Emma, can you answer that question?
Certainly. So, Culture and Information Services. So I cover trading standards, registration, coroners, libraries, and archives and records, as well as culture more generally within the remit of what Felicity has explained. So we have been operating some ceremony rooms according to social distancing directions. So one of the issues is that we haven't actually had the capacity necessarily to ensure social distancing with the registry rooms. I'm not specifically sure about the Havant ones, but certainly we have been offering ceremonies where we have been able to across the county council's portfolio and our district colleagues. And obviously you'll be aware that the next step change in guidance that happened earlier this week means that weddings now with 30 people can go ahead. So again, there's another step change for registration. So our registration colleagues are incredibly busy, as you can imagine, having a number of couples who have deferred their ceremony now come back online and want to have their ceremonies within our venues and within approved venues outside in Hampshire.
Okay.
Thank you. I would like to add that I've attended some of the citizens' ceremonies as a council representative, so it is something that new councillors might want to get involved in the future. It's a very interesting thing to do. So I'd just like to put it out there for some of the new members. And I think another thing that's come out of that talk is the number of places that we could add to a list of visits.
Yeah, and, we would really welcome you.
And I certainly would like to, I would like to welcome everybody to Staunton, even if they don't come to the opening, because what we've done in Staunton Country Park since the lottery bid it's just absolutely fantastic. And I mean, like all the country parks, they are so well used at the moment. I mean, it's just such a joy to go up there.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Branson. Councillor Chegwin, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Rod. Just to echo Jackie's point on Staunton, for new members who haven't been there, it's an absolute jewel, and Jackie and her colleagues have done wonderful work there with lottery money, and indeed before, so that would certainly be worth visiting again. Some of us have been there many times, but it'd be worth new members seeing it. My only other point, just to back you up, Chairman, on Hillier. Hillier, of course, isn't part of the County Council, but it does get substantial sums of county funding.
No.
And,
none.
All right, well, let me correct that. It has had substantial sums of county funding. It has had very considerable sums going back over 30 years, right back to Freddie Emery Wallace's day. He was a great supporter of Hillier and ensured they got an awful lot of county money. If there is any proposal ever to give Hillier any funding or indeed other support again, that we can surely scrutinise, even though it is not part of the county. And I think, going back to Jackie's area again, there are other facilities. Spring Arts Centre springs to mind, excellent arts centre that we provide funding to. We do scrutinise those, we visit, we look at where our money's going, and Hillier shouldn't be regarded as any kind of exception. If they're to have any support again, we have the right to scrutinise it, and I support you on your questions on that, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I certainly would appreciate if we could ask Hilios to actually come in and talk to us about what they're doing, even though we're not scrutinising. And I would find it really useful, given the quality of garden that we have in Hampshire, as Councillor Chairman points out, we've had a long link with. I personally find it really interesting to have them come in and talk to us about what they're doing. I think it's a fantastic asset for people of Hampshire, and I think the more that we help in the understanding of that, the better. And I think your comment, Councillor Chairman, about funding is absolutely appropriate. I think that we should scrutinise if there's going to be any public money in the future going to that, irrespective of what's happened in the past. So thank you for that comment. Do we have any other?
Visit.
Yes.
Worth a visit.
Thank you, Councillor. I've written down lots of notes about things for the upcoming item, which is work programme and visits. And Felicity, in your talk, you kept on saying we need to look at that. We need to look at that. So as we move on to the final item, which is the work programme. I don't know if it makes sense, Felicity, to talk about what the regular items are first, but certainly I wrote down your list of things that we should be asking to come and talk to us. Clearly the coroners, which Rod Cooper mentioned at the beginning, at the Hampshire Scientific, which we didn't look at, I don't think, in the last 4 years. The trading standards. You made an interesting comment about bridges, about the liability of bridges. I hate to say something that I think we need to be aware of. And you and I talked before about the Basingstoke Canal and that liability. And I'm very much aware of the potential liability, having been a regular user of the cycleway along the Basingstoke Canal, going above housing, about what that liability looks like. So those are all items that I'd like to add to our list of items. Do we have a regular work programme that we've got to fit in certain events? We can add those around, or is it up to us what we do?
It's really up to you what you do, and Kevin may want to come in. There are certain points in the year when something comes up that goes to all select committees, most notably the budget in January. But that's probably about the only real fixed point in the year and the fixed point in everyone's programmes. This year there will be September, October time, we'll be looking at the proposals for the spending review for 2023, so that will be something that goes to all select committees. But other than that, you have pretty free rein. Kevin, unless you want to add anything on that.
No, I was going to say exactly the same. Actually, the budget and any savings proposals sort of that are being looked at county-wide would go regularly to all select committees. But other than that, it's your own work programme.
Yeah.
Thank you. I've certainly found in the last session the presentations by the Hampshire Cultural Trust incredibly useful, and the same thing for what used to be the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Sports organisation, whose name I've temporarily forgotten.
Energise Me.
Yeah, I want to call them everyone active, but I know that's a leisure provider, so it's not quite right. Energise Me, yes, I'm sorry, I should remember that. And I found that their presentations, and I think an annual presentation for both those two organisations is incredibly useful. What we, and Councillor Chairman will know this much better than I do, that the rhythm of having 2 or 3 presentations per formal committee strikes me as being about right. I think it's going to be difficult to absorb more than that, but I do think if we can fit in 2 or 3 for every one of our quarterly sessions, I think that is a worthwhile goal to have. And I certainly think that Councillor Cooper's point about coroners is worth exploring. That's one that I think we should put towards the top of that list. And the other one I thought about was trading standards. It'd be very useful to have a presentation on those two at the beginning of the rhythm of the quarterly sessions. Councillor Bryant, you have your hand up.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Yes, I agree with all of your suggestions there. I think there's some fantastic ones. There is one that actually I had written down was Culshot, and I think we've got this great excitement coming in of, is this aircraft going to be there for just a certain time? Or a period of time, or do we, is it something we need to do, put a date in the diary about coming in, or is it going to be there for a while?
If it comes, and I really hope we will pull it off, it will be permanent.
Oh,
so
lovely.
It'll be part of the destination Culshot, but and it will be a fully flying piece of kit. So
wow.
Anyone who wants a lift can have it. I refuse to go anywhere near it.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. That's all I really wanted to contribute, Chairman, but thank you very much indeed. It's been a fantastic presentation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.
I've certainly in the last time got a huge amount of benefit out of visiting all the different country parks, going down to the Royal Victoria, going down to Lepp, and I think that rhythm of visits, trying to interspace those between the formal committees, I got a huge amount out of in the last 4 years. Yeah. And I think that as the COVID restrictions ease, then I think we should aim to go to having a programme of visits for members of the committee, and indeed other councillors as well, as part of this committee as well. And I appreciate that enormously. And I think as we come out of the restrictions, we can certainly organise visits to Calshot, for example. I think the Basingstoke Canal is on my list of things to go and have a look at that area above the housing and thinking, yeah, sharp intake of breath. What's is actually worth the Hampshire County Council? But I'm sure that the country parks as well are worth going back onto as well. Councillor Crawford.
Sorry, thank you, Chairman. You have to excuse me if in my capacity as a novice, I ask inappropriate questions at this point, but there's three matters that I wonder if they're subject to possible scrutiny. The first is I've just been reading the Balancing the Budget consultation, and I noticed that there's several items there which come within the remit of this committee, which seem to be looking for particular savings, as it's called. And I wonder, does this committee have any role in commenting on that? Because the closure of the public consultations, I believe the 18th of July. That was the first question. The second question is, I'm based in Aldershot, and of course there's a huge emphasis here on regeneration, and the relationship between culture and regeneration in towns is very much to the forefront. And I wonder if there's a scope here for some kind of scrutiny of what role Hampshire could play in assisting the regeneration of towns in that kind of way by bringing forward perhaps cultural projects and so on. I don't know. That's the second thing. And the third thing is the whole issue of the census and the outcome of the census and what change that might bring about in our perception of the structure of communities in Hampshire. Because I know in our area, the proportion of, for example, Nepalis living in Rushmore will be going up, at least doubling compared to the 2011 census. So in some kind of way, how does this committee take account of changes in the structure of the population like that? Sorry, excuse me if they're inappropriate questions.
They are. I think they're anything other than an inappropriate question. I think they're all fascinating questions, which I would equally like answers to. And Kevin did mention at the beginning, we've got a role of developing sustainable communities, and I think your three questions fit exactly into that remit. So I think they are entirely appropriate. I hate to give Felicity the hospital pass of trying to answer them, but I think it'd be useful to have some feedback from the professional staff about those three questions.
And I may pass my pass to Emma in a second, but just the easy one, which I will pick on, is balancing the budget. That will come to you in September, October time as a sort of to set out what the CCBS approach is to the savings proposals for 2023. I think what I can reassure the committee is that there is no proposal in there to make any significant change, detrimental change to public-facing services. A lot of the proposals are based on the increasing generation of income and managing like the outdoor service, which I mentioned, to stand and wash their own faces in terms of their income and their outgoings. So obviously much more to come on that for you, but there is no, I don't think there are any nasty surprises that you will find when we get to September on that one. Right, sorry, the other two, Emma can say something about regeneration. I have to admit the census outcome and the structure of communities, I just need to give some more thought to. It's a very, very good question. I'm not sure I can answer it at the moment, but Emma, just very briefly around the regeneration work.
Certainly, Councillor Crawford, I'm delighted that you've picked up the link between culture and the regeneration of particularly high streets, but also communities, particularly in the post-COVID landscape. Now, it's really interesting in Hampshire. There is a lot happening. So there is a cultural compact that has just been formed in Rushmore to look at how the cultural strategy links into the wider economic strategy for Rushmore. And Gosport is also a key area of interest in terms of the High Street Action Zone, and again a really sharp focus on how cultural recovery links into wider economic recovery and high street recovery. So I think we'd be very happy to bring to you a kind of overview of the landscape of what's happening in Hampshire. And I'd probably say we do that jointly with Hampshire Cultural Trust, because although we carry the strategic lead for the County Council, the Cultural Trust also are represented at many of these groups as well. But I think it's certainly something that the Select Committee would be very helpful in understanding and contributing to.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a thought: if we are planning on visiting a couple of sites to for a look round, I just thought I'd throw it out there. Maybe we could hold this committee physically at one of those sites, as opposed to just visiting it.
Yeah, that's great. I think I was mentioning Kelshot Hangar not so long ago, so we'll see what we can do. Probably gives Kevin a headache, but we can cope with that. Some Anodin will help, Kevin.
And also, not least of which, there is a meeting room at the Basingstoke Canal, which I previously sat on the Basingstoke Canal committee, and as it is one of the places that is high on our priority list, we could kill two birds with one stone, dare I say.
Thank you. Does that also apply to the country parks? Could we potentially hold the meetings in Leap or the Royal Victoria or Staunton North QECP?
I see no reason why not. Kevin may be blanching at this in terms of web development and public access. So I think we'd have to look at the legalities of what can be done. But provided we can get over those democratic hurdles, then there's no reason why you shouldn't. But I think we just need to take that back to base and just see what the possibilities are.
Thank you for that. Does that imply that we may have some portable technology that we can take around with us from site to site?
I think you're testing my knowledge at the moment. We'll have to take it away and see what we can do.
Okay, I'll leave that with you. But I think that suggestion, Mr. Cooper, is a really interesting one, so that we can combine two things on the same day. I think that's a very good idea. Do we need to go through and actually work out for the next 4 meetings what the schedule of work programme is now to actually make some suggestions, or do we leave that with the officers to come up with, given the guidance we've got?
I want that to be member-led, Chairman, but there might be a case for you and I sitting down and coming up with something in draft with some options that we could then sort of explore a bit more with the first formal meeting of the committee.
Okay, well, my suggestion, and I'm again open to member-led, is there's a total democracy here. As other suggestions, welcome. The ones I thought that we didn't scrutinise in the last session were the coroner's top of the list, trading standards, and Hampshire Scientific Services. Those would be the 3 that I would like to see first. I'm very open to certainly longer standing members of the committee who feel that I might have missed something else. So, Councillor Chairman, if you've got a suggestion that I've missed, then now's the time to tell me I'm wrong.
No, I think those are very good, because they are important subjects, Rod, that we don't actually normally scrutinise, so I completely support you on that. Could I just add one other suggestion for a report? It links in with the comments about culture and regeneration, that just a general wide-ranging report on, as we come out of the pandemic, the effect it's had on our services and on those outside the county which we fund. And I think of things like the Spring Arts Centre again, some of the services that have really, really struggled and are still struggling, where they can only open with limited capacity, and where we provide some funding, but maybe in some areas, rather than continually cutting budgets, they actually need more support if they're to survive, because some of them really are facing, particularly with the delay on coming out of lockdown step 4, the arts and culture facilities really are struggling. That includes the ones that the Culture Trust run. So perhaps a wide-ranging report saying the good things, those that have done very well during lockdown. The digital library service has been mentioned several times. The country parks, which have been a very cheap and very valued source of recreation for many people. But there are other services that we run directly or support indirectly that have struggled, and even things like the Outward Bound Centre in the Brecon Beacons, which is an amazing facility that new members may not have been aware of before today that we run, but I believe they've been largely closed throughout. I hope very much we've continued to fund them during closure, and it's the kind of facility that it would be easy for someone to put a line through the so-called balance in the budget or whatever, and it would be very wrong to do so. Facilities like that are incredibly valuable. So just a wide-ranging report of all the services, direct and indirect, during the pandemic, the theatre groups that we fund and people like that, how they have survived, if they have survived, what support we may be able to give them going forward, because our money and support office expertise to some of them will make the difference of them surviving or not surviving. So I think maybe early autumn, when hopefully, touch wood, we're not going back into lockdown, a wide-ranging report would be worthwhile, and very much support Councillor Crawford and Emma Noyce on the links with culture and regeneration and bringing our high streets back into action. That would be very valuable. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that. One other thing I thought would be very useful, the Chairman's remarks at the beginning were very kindly provided to me, and I think there's a huge amount of information we have about the way our residents use our services, and I think it'd be very useful to have at the beginning of almost every committee meeting some idea of those kind of metrics that were provided to me, and therefore passed on to the committee as we came out of lockdown and come out of COVID. We're going to have some really unusual changes in the way our residents use our facilities, and it'd be really useful to have some degree of just the numbers involved with that, the number of visitors, whatever it's going to be, numbers using the registration service, numbers using the libraries, and all those sorts of information, because I know we, as a council, I get asked it about lots of things the council does, for example, the recycling centres, all those sorts of things get asked about, but also to have that information to hand for residents is hugely useful, not just for the members of this committee, but I think for all councillors, try and show how the residents are using the council services and how that's changed over the course of the last 18 months. And I'm hoping I'm not putting too much of a question. I'm hoping that's information that we collect anyway, but actually making that public via this committee, I think, is a very worthwhile outcome. Councillor Longby, you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody.
You're a bit quiet, you.
Yeah, I know. I don't quite know. The technology is failing me slightly. I've got it on full volume, so I'll lean forward in a slightly leery fashion. Please, no one let Operation Nutri know at this point. Can I ask just a very simple question? Felicity, was loads of really good stuff about what we were doing as a group and what others were doing and what cabinet members were responsible for different things. Does there exist somewhere a list that shows that breakdown of exactly which cabinet members have responsibility for precisely which items, and similarly which officers are responsible as well, some sort of organogram and some sort of overlay as to what the committee covers? It's probably somewhere really obvious, but I haven't found it yet, and apologies.
So for the member induction, we will be doing an organogram of the department in terms of who does what, so that you've got that information and members have got that information. In terms of cabinet member portfolio, select committee portfolio, that is available. It's just being brought together and finalised at the moment for the new administration, but it is at a fairly high level. So you won't get the detail that, in fact, to the level even that I've just given you. So you're right that it doesn't really exist. It is much more high level than that. So I think the answer is we can point you in the direction of what there is, and Kevin can do that. But you won't find that goes down into the minutiae, even of what I've gone through in terms of Councillor Heron's portfolio or Councillor Reid or Councillor Forster's. So what I've put on that slide, but also we'll make sure we're putting as much information as we can into the full member induction programme whenever that finally runs after COVID restrictions are lifted.
Just to confirm, the updated exec member portfolios are in the constitution, and that has been updated. But Felicity's right, they are quite high level. So sort of what some of the titles mean in reality, we might need to give some more explanation to if you've got specific questions.
Does that mean that we're going to get an organogram of not just the departments in CCBS, but also the names of the members of staff who run the different parts of it?
Yeah, we won't go down into the weeds, but we will make sure that the senior staff are on there.
Excellent, thank you. Is that enough of a steer on for the work programme for the next couple of meetings? Obviously, we have that as an agenda item at the end of every committee meeting, and therefore, as we go forward on a rolling, I guess, 6 months basis, we can actually talk about what we're going to do at the meetings in January and May next year, maybe the next meeting on the meeting after. Does that make sense? Would you want us to put together a work programme for those two at this stage?
Probably not at this stage. I think I will touch base with you just in terms of timeline planning,
Okay.
and we can perhaps sketch out what the year might look like to give a rhythm to it. So we will touch base on that in the next few weeks.
Excellent. That makes perfect sense. I can't see any hands up for any other questions, but it's been a very useful and informative session. So thank you, Felicity, Emma, and Kevin for that, and thank you all for attending. Jackie, you have your hand up for a question quickly. Councillor President, you're muted.
I was just checking that in future, I assume that we will be meeting in person and that, or will we be doing anything else virtually? I was just wanting to clarify that.
I think the meetings will be in person going forward, Councillor Branson. Unfortunately, the regulations don't allow us to make formal decisions in a virtual sense, so we can have an informative briefing like this remotely, but as it stands, not make any formal resolutions.
Thank you. Just checking.
Thank you. I think that unfortunately is quite clear, unless the legislation changes, which obviously we're hoping it might in some circumstances. Well, good. So thank you all very much for your time today and your attention, and hopefully you enjoyed that, and we look forward to the full members induction in due course, and our next meeting is on the 20th of September, so we look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.